Welcome to the Awakened Collective, where we explore the topics of love, spiritual consciousness, and our divine purpose on this planet. Join us as we uncover the truth that our thoughts shape our reality. Welcome to the Awakened Collective. I am Rick Gregory, and it is a pleasure to be with you today on this St. Patrick's Day. I don't own a lot of green, but I did manage to find some, and I'm wearing cologne from Ireland called Innis, so I think I've got my bases covered. It's a pleasure to be with you, and a special thank you to Audio Alchemy Productions and Daniel Anderson, once again, for the gift they are to the world. Thank you for joining us today. And as always, every week, I would like to remind you that you are the extension of your Creator's divine love on this planet. You have never been separated from your Creator, and we have never been separated from one another. Now, you may think you are separated, but think is the operative word there, because our thoughts shape our reality. And the good news is we can change the way that we think. The thoughts and ideas expressed in this podcast are my own and those of my guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Audio Alchemy production studio or staff. I'm really excited to have a couple of special guests this morning. They are Karl and Laura Forehand, and I happened to come across these wonderful human beings on Facebook. Imagine that. It's amazing how the universe just brings these folks across my path on Facebook, and it is amazing to me. They have a group called the Desert Sanctuary, and upon reading many of their posts, I recognized right away that we are at similar points on our journey, our spiritual journey. They formerly pastored a Faith Baptist Church in Nebraska City, Nebraska. They are authors, bloggers at pathos.com, podcasters with the Desert Sanctuary. They also do life coaching. They are busy folks. And I am so grateful that I get to call them my friends today, and so thankful that they have a heart to serve the world. Those are the people that attract my attention. So welcome, Karl and Laura. So glad to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I thought, and you can go anywhere you want with this. So we are free spirits here. I want to hear from the two of you, and it's kind of probably a selfish thing, but whatever direction you want to go in, but personally would like to hear a bit of your story. We talk a lot in the rooms of recovery. Our stories are usually what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. But so how your journeys have evolved over the last many years to bring you to this beautiful place of service to the world. So welcome, and whoever would like to get us started with that.
Yeah, I can start first. I was born in Oklahoma. I was kind of a country boy. Grew up, and during my late elementary, junior high years, I went to an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and also attended the private school there. So I don't remember. I remember, fiery messages about hell and things like that, but I don't remember any direct trauma that came from that. No one abused me, other than they believed in corporal punishment and they administered that. But mostly I just got a lot of toxic indoctrination. So later on in life, when I met Laura and we started a family and we started thinking about going back to church, or maybe, having a family environment kind of thing, and having those thoughts, I went back to the only churches I knew, which were independent Baptist churches or Southern Baptist churches from my mother's side. And that's where we ended up. And before long, I was teaching Sunday school and eventually working as a computer programmer at that time, but ended up trying to finish my bachelor's degree and ended up kind of in seminary in Omaha, Nebraska. So when we finished, still in the master's program there and still learning, still being a computer programmer, but found a church that wanted us We gave up our salary. My salary got cut in half. We moved to a town of 250. Took on a church that was meeting in a double wide trailer, and eventually built our own building. Had 80, 100 people coming. Good functioning church for 6.5 years, but eventually went away from that and pastored 2 other churches. And all in all, about 20 years of ministry service. But around 2014, 2015, we started really asking questions. And I think Laura had checked out long before that. But I started to address my racism, my homophobia, and things like that in a real serious way. And then it just became almost impossible to pastor a church because I was wrestling with those issues on stage, and finally stepped down and said, told Laura, I can't do this anymore. I've got to go ask the questions. I got to sort this out. Went through a deconstruction and real quickly started writing books. We tried to attend a church about an hour from here that was more progressive. And before long, we're getting in fights on the way home. And eventually we stepped back from that, went to a Methodist church next door, and still had the same issues. Just too much trauma we didn't even realize we had was coming to the surface. And eventually we had to start dealing with that. And now, to make a long story short, now we live in a space where we're trying to advocate for those disenfranchised groups. We're trying to, we hear a lot of survivor stories on our podcast for people that have suffered religious and personal trauma. We hear those stories. We count that a privilege. And that's kind of our work now, is to write, to podcast, to listen to people. And that's our story.
Yeah, my story. I actually have a Lutheran background. So that was my mother's religion from her family of origin. And so she just raised us that way. My dad was Catholic, but I think was, not a, practicing Catholic. So anyway, so what I remember growing up though in the Lutheran church was just not a lot of information based on a relationship with God. So when we went to church, it was like, we never brought our Bibles. We sang hymns, the pastor preached, and, we were good for a week. So, I went to confirmation classes because that's what you did. I feel like all my life when it came to religion, I kind of just went through the motions of what was expected of me, but there was never like this really strong relationship. However, I also feel like my relationship with my earthly father kind of mirrored that relationship that I had or didn't have with God, because my earthly father was here one day, gone the next. There wasn't really this dynamic relationship between us. And not really a dynamic relationship. He didn't really have a dynamic relationship with me or my sisters. So, that was kind of my upbringing, which I think I looking back now, I can say, well, no wonder I kind of fell prey to the types of traumas that I experienced in the churches that we started going to, because I think I was always looking for that acceptance, a way to fit in, a way to belong. But what I was doing wasn't really ways to get you to belong. It was really ways to get you to fit in to the organization. So, but I also remember telling Karl that I wasn't going to be the typical pastor's wife. And I wasn't to some degree, but I was in other ways, such as like leading women's Bible studies, working in the nursery, all the things that, women in this particular denomination were supposed to serve, not really how they wanted to necessarily serve. I sang in a worship band, I think in 2 of the 3 churches that we pastored. So, but it's just interesting to me as I step outside of organized religion, how much I realized that my trauma from growing up those years kind of made me, I always say, like, ripe for the picking for the trauma I experienced in church. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
What I find too in your story, and it seems like that's where God, universe has me as well today. Helping others in recovery, you would be amazed at the folks that come across my path that have trauma,
Mhm.
religious trauma.
Mhm.
And the whole idea of the steps and turning your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand God. And it trips a lot of people up that have had religious trauma. And telling them that they can come up with their own understanding of God is eye-opening. For me, when I first heard that, I thought it was blasphemy because that's what I was taught. That how could you possibly come up with your own conception, your own idea of God? I mean, you need to listen to the instructors and those more intelligent than you, those that have been in ministry longer than you,
Mhm.
all of those thoughts. And yet, I finally came to the place where I realized that if I'm not following a God of my own understanding, then whose understanding of God am I following?
Mhm.
And that began, that journey of questioning. But I find it amazing that, because our experiences are never just about us, are they? I
Mm,
mean,
Right.
we see them unfold in how we have those experiences to be able to help other people today. Would you agree with that?
mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely agree with that. And I do, I think at first when we kind of stepped outside of organized religion and we're starting our deconstruction journey, for lack of a better word, I think I was very, very angry because, because of that. But the more I, think about how I've kind of made friends or integrated like the things that happened that were traumatizing to me in my childhood. And I've almost kind of said, okay, I can see how, that has allowed me to um, fall prey, if you will, to the things that happened in the church. So I'm no longer angry. It's almost like this, like your show, it's almost like this awakening. Like, okay, I can see how these two things go together. Now let's work on healing that.
Yeah.
Let's work
Mhm.
on integrating that and, finding a way to help others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it seems yeah, it
go
seems like
ahead.
religious systems are built around this idea of we want to think the same. We want to so we can have some control. And so
Mm,
but then if a church is successful at all, then it becomes an organization.
Hmm.
You can meet in a home, but once it succeeds, then it becomes an organization pretty quick. And the what we always say is the organization comes first,
yeah.
and that just begins to create problems.
Right.
If their goal is to survive, if their goal is not to embarrass the church, if their goal is to keep the trains running, keep
Yeah.
the show alive for Sunday morning, then it's always going to harm people. You mentioned religious trauma. The Global Center for Religious Research says that 1 in 3 people have religious trauma,
Mm,
and I would say that's a short estimate.
yeah.
It's probably more than that because what we discovered was a thing called spiritual bypassing. Robert Augustus Masters talks about this in detail, but using religious phrases and
Hmm.
catchphrases and pad answers and things like that because we got to keep the trains running. I don't have time to have a discussion with every single church member. And because of that, we spiritually bypass. And you have Christians like us, um, 20 years in ministry, we did nothing but stuff that trauma down.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We just didn't have time to deal with it. I didn't have time to maintain a relationship with my immediate family.
Mm.
My brothers and sisters are, you know, you know, relationally separated from me. We get to
Yeah.
see each other every once in a while, but it was more important to keep the trains running. And
I
so
get
that trauma just gets stuffed down.
it. Mhm.
And then 5 or 6 years ago, all of that came up at the same time.
Yeah.
We said, you got to deal with it. You got to feel what you're feeling, or it's going to come out sideways.
Mm.
And it does. And it did. And
Mm-hmm.
it was like I was trying to deal with all of that trauma all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very, uh, you know, it's you're trying to break free from organizational religion and trying to find the truth, trying to find God, trying to understand God and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But at the same time, you're going to have to deal with all that trauma that you ignored for so long, because it's going to come up.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, I want to go inside and find my view of God, you're also going to find the darkness. You're going to find what you've been ignoring.
Yeah.
And that may have been your 5-year-old self trying to
Mm-hmm.
deal with the trauma that he experienced.
Yes. Yep, that shadow work is
Yeah,
really, really
exactly.
necessary. It's
Exactly.
amazing how aligned our stories are, and just you're bringing back a lot of memories for me, in the church when I started pastoring my own church, there was about 12 people. We got up to about 85 people. And where you had said you got to a point where you were looking at, your homophobia and racism. I was a gay man in that role, trying to wrap my arms around that whole thing and,
Hmm.
hating myself as a result of all of that,
Hmm.
wanting to
Yeah.
change so badly and trying to, do all the right things, say all the right things. What's today I realize, and it brings on some amount of sorrow, is that all we ever really wanted, all our hearts ever really wanted, was just the awareness of the love of our Creator. To
Hmm.
have, like you said, that relationship. It was so innocent. And in that innocence, we grab onto all that information and trying to do the right thing because we want to get to this point. And yet there was no place to get to. It was in us all along. It's just, and I love what you said, Laura, about, you're not angry anymore. I know when I moved to Mississippi, um, and met Glenn, he was attending a church, and, so I went with him a few times. I did all those things, choir. My, former wife did all the roles that you mentioned, Laura, as well. And, so I did attend the church a few times with him, and he was really enjoying it. And, but, the whole thing about we weren't able to be members, we found a church nearby our home that we fell in love with and started going. We went for a year. We met with the pastor. They all seemed really open. They knew we were a married gay couple, and we went to the membership classes, and we're all excited. I'm waiting for that moment that they were going to introduce us to the church as part of the church family, which that's a story for another time, but that never happened. And the pastor called us aside and said, the elders of the church came up with a new contract that we would have to sign. And the contract stated that we believed a marriage was between a man and a woman only. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that resulted, and of course, we were both struggling with alcohol at the time, and it didn't help, let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And, so that anger, we carried with us for a bit.
Hmm.
And but like you said, Laura, today I just see things differently, and I'm so thankful for that I'm able to see that people are doing the best they can do with the knowledge they have at the moment. And because I was there, and from your story, you were there also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if I could just say something real quick,
Oh, take your time.
I think sometimes it's important for people that have been through trauma to understand this. One of our friends, their counselor, told them, "You keep apologizing for being angry," and she said to her, "You're not angry enough
Mm,
because of what happened."
Mm-hmm.
I think there is definitely a season
Mm-hmm.
where you need to be angry. This was wrong, and it hurt you, and you need to process that and spend some time with it,
Mm-hmm.
because we have friends that call forgiveness the F word because they were forced to forgive
Right.
people before they had a chance to address the issue
Mm-hmm.
mm,
or mend the relationship or heal from how it traumatized them. For a season, I think it's important to
Absolutely.
feel that anger and say what's beneath that may be
Mm-hmm.
sadness or something else, but um, it's important to go through that stage
Mm-hmm.
at least and make sure that you're addressing all of those issues and not just saying, well, we just need to forgive people. We need to unconditionally love them and being forced uh,
That makes perfect
to
sense.
miss that healing process.
Yeah, and I would say that there are times where we're listening to people's stories that I'm angry. I'm angry for them.
Mhm.
And I don't think that anger necessarily, I hope it never goes away. I really do, because I think that the minute it goes away forever, am I really thinking about justice in this world?
Mhm.
But I'm not living in a place of anger anymore. And I think that's the
That's
difference for
yes.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
that is key. So tell us about, the desert sanctuary. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the desert metaphor basically is what you feel like. So when you leave organized religion, or just if you start asking questions, or you start questioning your faith, examining your beliefs, doing that introspection, sometimes it can feel like, that's what we say, you're wandering
Mhm.
out into the desert, and we have all this PTSD. I don't know who I am without religion. I don't know who I am with a different view of God. I don't know what to do. What should I do on Sunday morning? And so the desert, is more of a
Mhm.
how we feel, um,
It
but
feels lonely.
it feels
Yeah.
lonely.
Isolating.
And so, if I could make a really long story short, is just that what we feel our role is. And I picture Lucy from Charlie Brown, um, being at her little booth out there just outside of organized religion, and we are greeting people there. We
Mhm.
hear their stories. We've heard over 300 stories on our podcast. We're writing and reflecting on what's happening and what we're learning from all those stories, in our books and in blogs and so on. And then we have a Facebook group where, reasonable size Facebook group where people can, if they want to, express their concerns, and
Mhm.
sometimes they'll come to us directly. So it's maybe an oasis for spiritual nomads,
Yeah,
something like that. It's a stopping place. We don't want to we don't want to start a new religion, start a new church,
yeah.
or have a new belief system
Mhm.
or anything like that. We just want to be out there with
Mhm.
the other explorers, and walk on journeys with them. And you know, eventually your paths probably lead away from each other, and then you'll come back in contact with people you haven't seen in a while,
Mhm.
just like real life. But that's kind of where we see ourselves,
Mhm.
right? Is that
Yeah, and I would say, like, the word sanctuary, because I remember when we were coming up with this, the desert part was, that was a done deal. Because I mean, I can totally relate to the feeling of isolation and feeling like there's no life out here. I'm starting fresh with just, nothing. It's just dry, it's just barren. But the word sanctuary meant a lot to me, because to me, it meant a place of safety, which is something that I hadn't had for a very, very long time. I mean, probably if we go back to even, my childhood, just that sense of safety, that sense of whatever you're bringing with you, whatever you're feeling, whatever your thoughts are, we want to create this safe space, this sanctuary where you can be
who you are?
who you are, but also you can figure out who you are. Because when you first, uh, I always say when you, but I should speak for myself. When I was first deconstructing, I had no idea. Like, it was just like, who am I? What do I even like? What's my, favorite color? I don't know. Like, I don't know any of these things, because for so long I'd been told what to believe about myself and what was right and what was wrong. And it was very cut and dry. And so that word sanctuary just was, and I didn't want it to sound too churchy, and I guess it kind of does, but to me, it meant a place of safety,
Yeah.
and a place, we just, I just posted on my Facebook page this little video clip from Brene Brown about empathy versus sympathy. And for so long, that spiritual bypassing that we talked about was really sympathy based. Oh, well, poor you, God has a plan, whatever. But we want to be a place where you can get empathy. We've been there. We understand. We may not understand every minute detail of it because everybody's journey is particular to them, but we want to be a place of safety and empathy and a place to walk alongside people.
Mm.
I
You
think
are
the
an
yeah,
oasis. You
Mhm.
yeah.
all are an oasis in that desert.
Also, I think to add to that just a little bit is ultimately the spoiler alert, and I'm writing a novel right now about this, that eventually you discover that the real sanctuary
Mm.
is inside you,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and that's where home is. That's where your authentic self is.
Mhm.
That's where Jesus said the kingdom of God
That's right.
is within. So ultimately, you try to help lead people to be authentic, to be present, and also to go inside.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And over and over and over, people that have succeeded out here in the quote unquote desert have told us that's when it changed, is when I learned to trust myself and my own intuition. And I developed my own intuition by going inside.
Mhm.
Mm.
That's where I found
Yeah.
healing. That's where I found sanctuary.
Well, you know what? I wasn't, I got I saw a Facebook post this morning on my way here. I read through it, and what you just said, um, just rings so close to this. I would love to share this. It's a little long, but I would love to get your take on it. And it's written by
Sure.
a gentleman by the name of Timothy Moody. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was also a Baptist minister.
Mhm.
And this is, I just find this profound. And it says, "In my dream, I walked up to the old cemetery on the hill outside of town. What I saw startled me. All the headstones were gone. The ground was completely flat. There were no graves, no flowers left, no trinkets and mementos anywhere. There was only grassland, resilient and beautiful. And I realized the earth was newly formed. There were no people yet. We were still an idea in the mind of God, or an imaginative concept within the mystery of creation. Darwin's evolution theory still percolating in some future time. And afterwards, the thought occurred to me, what if, when humankind finally arrived, we came with an innate understanding of our worth, that we were here not to make the world what we wanted, but to let it teach us what to be,
Mm.
Mhm.
that the land and the animals, the oceans and the mountains, the rain, snow, warm sunshine, unruffled nights, and yes, even the dry desert, the cacti and poison ivy, the windstorms and lightning, the dangers as well as the safety would all inform our way of life, that we would be humbled by the unknown and not simply explain it away with superstition and fables, that we would explore the secrets waiting to be discovered, and there would be no Adam and Eve and a snake and apple, no sacred tree or universal curse. We humans would not be seen as born in evil and driven to hurt and harm others, to be selfish and destructive, sinners in need of salvation. The explanations of our behavior would come from the insights of the land, that we too would know that as a part of the earth we are seasonal people, and that our destructive episodes are not our only response, but that we also have within us the forces of splendor, beauty, and creativity, that like nature, we can be tender and benevolent, fragile and unselfish, sensitive and loving. But unlike nature, we would not be locked in an endless cycle. As humans, we would evolve beyond a fixed process of existence. We would have the inner resources to control our behavior, to live out our lives within moral values and humane principles and enable us to say no to our worst impulses. It wouldn't come from religion. It would be instinctive,
Mm.
which I feel certain we already possess. We
Mhm.
don't need God or sacred texts or the prophets of old or today's dreary preachers to tell us right
Mhm.
from wrong. We know that intuitively. And if humankind
Mhm.
believed itself to be originally good without the guilt of some original sin theory, without the burden that we owe God our lives, but instead take our lives as the miracles they are and grow like nature does into specimens of grandeur, then perhaps the world would hum in harmony. I think of lines from Austrian poet Rilke. I feel it now. There's a power in me to grasp and give shape to my world. I know that nothing has ever been real without my beholding it. All becoming has needed me. My looking ripens things, and they come toward me to meet and to be met. What a unity of life and purpose might result from that. For all these years, we have battled and attempted to define good and evil. What if we simply found the world a welcoming place, instead of beating it into submission, dictatorially trying to control it and abuse it? We would learn from it, appreciate its wonder, and be taught by its beauty. And in our innocence, kneel with a flaming heart, an expanding mind, and so go forth to lead our lives from the lessons we have learned.
Mm. Yeah, that's so good.
That's really good.
I heard the word intuition really strongly in there, and we've been learning that over time. And people, we meet people all the time that are coming to the same place intuitively. It's not a new dogma. It's not a new creed. It's not something that a famous pastor dictated that we adhere to, or denomination or whatever. They come to it intuitively, and that has to be developed. But I think there's a place for seasoned guides, and those guides will come to you when you need them.
Yes.
You don't have to force it. You don't have to try to get in with the latest fad or the latest popular person.
Mm-hmm.
That those seasoned guides will come to you from the most unexpected places. But those two things together, learning to trust yourself, learning to go inside, developing that your own intuition and trusting yourself, which we were taught not to do.
Yep.
And I think before you can, really do all those things, you have to go back to that inner child and do that work to heal that inner child. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it reminds me of the saying, and I don't know who penned this, but when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That has been true for me. When that just the light bulb starts going on, it's amazing, the folks that cross your path, and it's not like we're propelled from our past, but we're being drawn by our future. It seems, it's like something is going on. It excites me to see it. It really does.
You find some of those when you elevate voices that have been silenced. We made an effort last fall to do our Leaning Forward conference and just have women's voices. We also did a focus on queer voices and so on, and we'll do that again in June, most likely. But we've got to hear from the people that we haven't heard from. I think that's a lot of where our learning comes in.
Yes.
So much insight in a Black woman in her experience, that if you can develop trust and listen to her story, you're going to hear so much, and it's going to be so convicting, and you're going to get defensive and everything else. But we have to listen to those voices we haven't heard.
Absolutely.
That's one of the ways we learn.
Yeah. I also think, and this was something that I experienced too, going through deconstruction, stepping outside of the walls of organized religion, was I came in contact with a lot of people that were like, well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but that doesn't happen at our church, and that's never happened to me. But what we need to do is exactly what you said. We need to sit and listen to people's stories and have that empathy to say, that may not have been part of my story, but I am so sorry that happened to you, because that shouldn't be happening. And the fact that if we call ourselves Christians, the fact that it's happening at any church should be concerning, should be very concerning. If we are Christ followers, nowhere do I see that is how Christ treated people. So.
And the people listening to this podcast and watching this video, it's through our sharing our stories, like you said, Karl. because that's what happened with me. I started coming across things on Facebook. One guy, you probably heard of him, Jim Palmer, who has the Center for
Mhm.
non-religious spirituality.
Yeah, we like
But
him.
I
Yeah.
just started reading things that were like, and my soul was saying, "Yes, this is what I have always known to be true, but has been so
Mhm,
stuffed down by all the dogma and all
mhm,
the do this and do that and trying to do the right thing." And there are people listening to this podcast that what we're sharing here this morning is going to do the same for them. It's gonna
mhm,
spark that intuitive voice that's in them that needs to be spoken and listened to, and that it's okay to follow that intuitive voice.
Mhm.
mhm. Yeah, for sure. We like Jim Palmer. And there's voices that have been important at times
Mhm.
to us. And as we've moved to different places in our journey, sometimes those fade away and then someone else comes into
Sure.
the picture. But it's very important. We are, most of my shadow work, I heard you say the word shadow
Mhm.
earlier, and you understood what I was talking about. Some of my shadow work came with Benedictine sisters, which is an odd
Nice.
place for me, being a former Baptist, to hang out.
I love it.
But they're doing spiritual direction training, which is not biblical counseling. It's different,
Mhm.
it's a whole different thing. But they would ask me to describe how I feel. And when I would tell them how I felt, they would ask me where I felt it.
Mm.
And then they would listen. And they hardly, almost never gave me any advice. They never told me their own personal stories. They just listened,
Mhm.
and they called it evocative listening, deep listening. And they were the observer, they were the companion that was just there with me. And that, I believe, that type of listening is what will change the world.
Mhm.
Laura is training me and teaching me so much. And as we listen to other people's stories, learning to do that, learning to
Mhm.
listen with empathy and compassion, maybe the other key word
Mhm.
that,
Powerful.
we hope for mercy. We don't want to be punished for what we did. But compassion is way more powerful because compassion can change you.
Mm.
When you do inner child work, you have compassion for the inner child, but also for the inner critic and the defender, or whatever you want to call that part of you. But compassion, empathy, like Laura's been talking about, and deeply listening um, does something. It
Mhm.
connects you with the person you're listening to. I think listening and compassion and empathy will change the world.
Yes, I agree with you. And seeing others, seeing the innocent child in other people too,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I've been, just getting in touch with my inner child. Our inner children are there and they've always been there and they'll always be there. And we can talk to them. We can finally comfort them with the comfort that perhaps we didn't receive as a child. And when
Hmm.
we are tender toward ourselves, guess what? We become tender toward other people.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And the word a lot of people use is integrated. You know that that part of us that's trying to heal, is trying to resolve some past trauma, can now become integrated.
Mhm.
It's not like we need to exterminate the inner child. We need to have compassion for it and to integrate it back into our lives. So then, instead of reacting, we respond.
Mhm.
We pause when something triggers us, and just a whole lot better existence when we begin to do that.
Yeah.
It's a matter of like staying curious. That's just been a word that I've kind of latched onto over, especially the last couple weeks. Is as a teacher, staying curious about my students who might be exhibiting some traumatic behaviors. But that's also true for us, right? We need to stay curious about ourselves, and when we feel like we are triggered by something and we perhaps react to that, getting curious about what it was that caused that reaction in us.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now you're talking, recovery program stuff there because that's
Hmm.
exactly what we talk about. When we're
Mhm.
Yeah.
disturbed, when we find some person, place, or thing unacceptable, taking a look at ourselves,
Mhm.
seeing what it is in there, because,
Hmm.
people can be our mirror, and they're just showing us ourselves when we react like that, and we really can
Yeah.
learn from one another.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah.
So tell us about your books. I saw some of them on Facebook, but I'd love to hear the books that you have and have our folks hear about
Mm,
them.
boy, that's
You go, because
it's
you're really, he's technically the author. I mean, I've written a couple. We've written a couple together, but
yeah.
you have a lot more books out than I do.
Yeah, and so they were never meant to be, you know, to be written to attract an audience. They were never intended for that. They started out as blogs. All of them
Mhm.
started out as blogs, and eventually, you know, coalesced into a book. But the first one is called Apparent Faith: What Fatherhood Taught Me About the Father's Heart. So that was when I was transitioning and still using a lot of God's language, but challenging the idea that if God is a father, then he's got to be better than me. He can't be more angry than me. He can't be more vindictive than I am. And so I examined nationalism and some of those ideas. I
Mhm.
didn't cover racism or homophobia because I was still dealing. I mean, I
Yep.
still had a long ways to go, and I still do. Um, but so that book was kind of the start for me
Mhm.
to ask the questions out loud and wrestle with them in the book. Um, and then we visited my son in Taiwan, and I went to a tea shop through a series of circumstances. I had a wreck on a scooter that caused me to detour our
Mhm.
plans, and we ended
Mhm.
up in this tea shop. And the guy was probably a Buddhist,
Mhm.
but it never really came up. He just showed me presence and authenticity and introduced those two concepts to me. And so the tea
Without
shop,
even speaking the same
yeah,
language.
with through a
Wow,
translator, and we never talked about religion
Mhm.
or life or anything like
wow.
that. But he served us tofu and tea, and he delighted that we were there and many of those kinds of things. And so it taught me it kind of set me on a path to where, and then um, as I began then to do that spiritual direction training I was talking about, and to investigate inside,
Mhm.
um, ended up in a place where I kind of had a dark night of
Mhm.
the soul, and um, really hard for us to talk about that without tearing up and so on, and bringing up other feelings. But I ended up at a hermitage where I did, you know, read a book overnight and called Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark. Did my own shadow work and really then kind of re-engaged with the women that were going through this course and processed some of that. But that being book is all about, it's called A Journey Towards Presence and Authenticity. So it's a real kind of raw look
Mhm.
at my healing, where my healing began.
Mhm.
And so after that, I decided to write a couple of novels. Wrote a novel about a hotel here in town based partly on facts. Wrote another novel about a diner and a woman who becomes empowered and becomes the hero of the
Mhm.
story and things like that. But then Laura and I kind of sat down together and wrote Out into the Desert, which is
Mhm.
Thriving Beyond Organized Religion or something like that. It's the subtitle. And really that was where we took a hard look at, um, you know, what was really true about religion for us. You know,
Mhm.
were we addicted to it? What's the cost of doing business in a church and so on? We looked honestly at that, and what ended up coming out in that was all of our stories,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, the traumatic things that happened. And Laura was especially helpful in that part to bring all of that out. And then we talked about thriving. How can we thrive later on in the
Mhm.
book?
Mhm.
And then the last book was called Leading Forward, which is now kind of our focus. Is do conferences called Leading Forward, online conferences, and so on. It's just looking forward, and so it just expanded from that previous book, and even included some of the things from the previous book in summary
Mhm.
and so on. So we kind of moved forward with that. So
Love it.
Uh,
That's a lot of work, my friend.
yeah, it said, and I had a stroke 2 years ago, so
Yikes.
now I'm disabled, and um, I get to write all the time,
Mm,
pretty much. So that it, it goes pretty fast. Other than I can't type like I used to,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
you gotta get some help with that. Keep those books coming. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
there are some good voice recognition software, but um, it'd be a long story. But I lost my access to that, and sometimes I feel like voice typing, and sometimes I just go through painstakingly with one hand,
Yeah.
typing it out and thinking through it deeply. So it can pay benefits either way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for the gift that you are to the world. And you just remind me that all of our experiences, I don't think, as hard as some of the things were that I personally went through, I don't think I would change any of them today, because I wouldn't have the gifts to give away that I'm able to give away today as a result of those experiences. And you just drove that point home again for me this morning. And I'm so thankful for that.
Good.
Thank you for all that you do, all the love that you are spreading out there in the universe. I look forward to maybe one day being on your podcast.
Absolutely.
I think
We're gonna have to get that going.
that's a definite possibility. I
I would
mean,
love that.
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
So glad we're on this journey together, on this planet together at this point in time. Excited for where our future will lead. I'm going to ask Danny if he would put up your contact information. So there you have it. That's Karl and Laura Forehand, the Desert Sanctuary, and they have a bunch of links. So rather than listing them all out, you can find them at Linktree, and that's linktr.ee/. Karl Forehand, and that's Karl number 4 HAND. It's
Mhm.
his list there. So thank you again, and I'd also like Danny, if you could put up, if you are struggling in any way, I would love for you to reach out. I would love to help in any way I can, or point you in the direction that you may need. So to reach out to me or get any info on anything about what we are doing here with the Awakened Collective, you can go to my website. It has recently been updated, and I'm really liking it. It's the awakenedcollective.org. Feel free to reach out there. All of my social media platforms, you can reach out to contact me. My books, the books I'm reading, everything is out there for you. So I'd love for you to take a visit. Thanks again to my dear
Mm.
friends. Until next time, love and kindness always.